Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the September meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at North Norfolk District Council. Our first item on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence.
No apologies received.
Thank you. Item 2, before I just leave that, I ought to just mention a welcome to Councillor Mike Hankins for joining the committee. I understand you have had the induction pack, so you've got off the first base, so to speak, in terms of preparation to partake in the committee. Thank you. Item 2 is substitutes.
No substitutes.
Thank you. And item 3, public questions and statements.
None received.
Thank you. Item 4 is minutes of the last meeting. So that's the meeting held on the 12th of July. We can just go through them page by page for accuracy, please. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Are you content that they are a fair and accurate record of that meeting? Thank you. Do you wish for a vote to be taken on that, or no? Okay, that's fine. So I will sign those as a true record. Thank you. Moving on then to item 5, which is items of urgent business.
Again, none received.
Thank you. Item 6, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest in relation to today's business? No? Okay, thank you.
Do we have Andrew Brown here yet? No. I think I'd just note that Andrew Brown will be declaring an interest for the enforcement update item.
Yes, I believe that to be the case. Thank you. Item 7, petitions from members of the public.
None received.
Thank you. Item 8. Item 8, we have a question from Councillor Cushing, which reads, I'm mindful that we have been seeking more detailed information on the North Walsham Heritage Action Zone project at various times since October 22, and so far not received any adequate responses. I understand that responses have been chased on the committee behalf through the offices of the Chief Executive. Please can we be advised of the progress on those matters and when we are likely to receive acceptable responses so that we may move forwards to some form of closure without delay? Who would like to respond to that?
I'm happy to respond to that, Chair. Good morning, members of the public. I'm Steve Blatch, Chief Executive. There has been correspondence around some elements of the funding for the North Walsham Historic Action Zone project and communications from the Chair to myself and other officers. There was a meeting yesterday between the Chair, Vice Chair and Councillor Housden, who I think had raised some of those original concerns. They met with the Director of Place and Climate Change, Martin Fulcher, and Rob Young, Assistant Director for Sustainable Growth, who has led that project. I understand that was a useful meeting. I'm afraid it couldn't have been organised any earlier due to holiday commitments of both officers and members. I don't know if you have, Chair, any further questions arising from that, but I'm happy to provide a written response if there are further questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Blatch, for that. No, I don't think I have any questions, but I really ought to invite Councillor Cushing to respond to that question before commenting further.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason I raised this, and this was raised at our December Overview and Scrutiny meeting. It's something that you and I raised when it was presented to the Cabinet that month in terms of the request that was made for £400,000. We didn't have an explanation of why that suddenly deficit appeared from seemingly nowhere, given that the previous update that we had had in September indicated there were no budget issues to be concerned about. When we saw the request for 400,000, there was no indication in the cabinet paper nor in the subsequent overview and scrutiny paper as to how that figure had been calculated. And that's what we asked for. And I don't think that's an unreasonable request. For those who don't know, I have a project management background and have sat in God knows how many probably three-figure change control boards over the last 20 years. And if you ever have a change request like that, the first thing you do is expect to understand how that figure was arrived at. And I don't think that was an unreasonable request. I think, I was surprised that wasn't included in the original papers in the first place, because I think that's just the basic thing that you would expect to see. And I think it was remiss of the cabinet to let that go through without actually challenging it as we did. And I don't think it's an unreasonable request on our part to actually ask for that. So I'm rather surprised here we are, 9 months later, and we still haven't seen any adequate answer to that question. So I'm a little bit bemused as to why we can't make progress on that, which is something which I wouldn't have thought was being an overly difficult piece of work to do. So do we actually know when we might get the figures that we asked for, the calculations and the background to that, please?
Okay, thank you. I think probably it would be appropriate for me to invite the other two committee members who attended that meeting to comment as well. So, Councillor Penfold, would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not in full agreement with Councillor Cushing on this. I think has been sort of stated in my responses at this committee and minuted in that I felt that there were adequate explanations provided previously. However, I think yesterday was very useful. I think it provided more nuance, perhaps, or detail around some of the questions that committee members had raised, and I, for one, found that very helpful. And thank you to Officers Fulcher and Young for that. I think it's important to note that the project actually isn't complete yet, so that some of those some of the figures involved in the 400,000, perhaps that's fluid at the moment. There's still works going on the Lokes, for example. So it might be that figure isn't 400,000. It could be less. We're not sure at the moment. But I certainly felt that yesterday was very helpful in answering some of the questions that other members of the committee had raised, and providing some of the detail as to why that additional 400,000, not contingency, of course, but additional 400,000 had been asked for. I think the one thing for me that came from it that would have been more helpful for us as a committee, and I think officers recognised this, was that rather than present that 400,000 request to us in December, perhaps that if the direction of travel, if you like, that had been known about, the potential of that had been known about before, perhaps in September, October, then it would have been helpful for us to know that request may have been coming. And I think that was a point that was agreed yesterday. So that would have been useful for us rather than it to appear in December as it did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
I think I have to agree with Councillor Cushing, particularly as I raised the initial question regarding contingency and a motion at one of the council meetings. Yesterday's meeting was very, very helpful. And as we discussed at some length, I think it's a great pity that information that we went through yesterday could not have been provided either in purple papers or in a more definitive, figurative means in the papers that we had during the course of the discussions. I think there are other issues which we raised, which we covered, and I don't think probably they're appropriate to go through now. But I certainly think yesterday's meeting was very worthwhile. I appreciate the officers' input, and particularly Rob Young's input, explaining and defining how the whole process came about in the first place. And I think for the future, we have to be more investigative in questioning. And I would like to see shorter reports, as Martin Fulcher knows, and I'd like those reports to be more definitive in a figurative sense. And if we can get that out of the meeting, I feel we'll have significant benefit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that gives, I think, everyone some idea of the feel of that meeting. the ball facts are that, as the question says, it's information that we have been seeking since October. So it does kind of beg a few questions as to why it was that we had to have a meeting in September, the following September, in order to resolve this. Now, I make no comment in terms of who might be responsible for that, because I think there's probably lessons for us all to learn in this. But I think for the purposes of this committee cannot operate with on that kind of timescale with the supply of information. So we've got to do better. And I say we, I'm talking about the collective we, and so we need to learn a lesson from this. I think I'm very conscious that half of the reconstituted committee probably don't know what we're talking about in detail, and that's not very fair. And I therefore would like, I think, to have what I would call a very short concluding report, which I think we mentioned, Mr. Fulger, yesterday, perhaps to the next meeting, so that it would just draw together those things that we've talked about today, that I think everybody on this committee has an entitlement to understand, if not all the detail, then the salient points that we need to move forward, because there's not much point, I don't think, in continuing to look backwards. We have to look forwards. We have to learn from those lessons. And so some of those will be relevant, I think, well, to all of us, I think, in one way, shape or form. So if you're supportive of that, then that's what I would propose as a recommendation. Can I have an indication of whether you would, can I have a seconder for that, please? I've got Councillor Housden. Can I have a show of hands, please, to support that we ask for a further report which would conclude the matter at the next meeting? Okay, thank you very much. That's agreed. The only other point that I wanted to clarify, and I don't know whether the monitoring officers can help us with this, but I believe, Councillor Cushing, you were looking for a written reply prior to this meeting. I certainly was exploring that opportunity, and I'm not sure that I understand quite why that wasn't possible.
Yes, that was my expectation. I did correspond with Officer Jordan yesterday, but I would have thought in principle, if we are submitting written questions for this committee or any others, it's not unreasonable to expect a written answer. So at least we can consider it before the meeting anyway. We might share it with the rest of the committee.
I can make some comment on that. If a member of the committee wishes to have an item placed upon the agenda, there's a timeline for that to happen, which is 7 days. That needs to be looked at, checked that it fits the criteria to go on the agenda. And in the Constitution, there's some options for the committee once that member has the item on the agenda, to either resolve it forthwith, to request a written report or response for the next meeting, set up a task and finish group, to make recommendations to the Cabinet or Council, or to decide to take no further action. So there's no requirement in the Constitution that a report or written response happens before the matter is put before the committee. And I think there's good reason for that, because that would allow the whole committee to hear everything. If it's possible, of course, to have some written comment, that could be made, but it would need to be shared with the whole committee. However, there's no requirement, especially considering the timeline between the agenda item and the committee meeting, for that to happen.
Well, thank you for that, but I'm not sure that it explains or tells us why it's not possible. So I think we would like to have a clearer understanding, if not now, then at some point, why that's not possible, because the very last point that you mentioned is very relevant, i.e. every member of the committee should be cognizant of what that issue was and what the response was. And one of the best ways of doing that is to have it in writing prior to the meeting, so that everybody can share it. But if you aren't in a position to explain why that's not possible.
I was saying it may be possible. I'm not saying that it's not possible. What I'm saying is it's not required under the Constitution, and there could be a good reason why a written response to an agenda item doesn't happen before the committee, because there may be more than one person, for example, that needs to put input into it. There may need to be information sought to be able to provide a proper and full response. And the Constitution therefore doesn't require it to happen before the committee, but it provides an option as an outcome of a decision for the committee having received that agenda item.
Okay. Councillor Cushing, you content to leave it there? I suspect we may need another conversation another day, perhaps, to see whether we can refine that in some stage, but that will be done for the committee at some future point.
Yes, I don't think it's worth debating today, but that might be something for the Constitution Working Party to have a look at, I think, in terms of the Constitution, because I do take the point that any written response which can be shared with all committee members prior to the meeting must surely help the debate that we actually have in the meeting on the subject, I would have thought. Thank you.
Councillor Penfold, I think you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, just to reiterate my invitation to committee members to visit North Horsham following the report, I think would be sensible, so we can walk through the scheme, talk through the scheme, and show you its great benefits. And I hope, given the level of interest in this, that all committee members would take me up on that offer. So I will send out an invitation and look forward to welcoming committee members.
Thank you for that. I think that that's clearly a matter for the committee to decide, and the invitation, I'm sure, will be more than welcome. There is one other further mention, and I think that this is in the interest of balance here, really. We spent quite a lot of time looking in investigative terms at what's gone on at North Walsham. I'm also aware that there are good things that need to be recognised and perhaps celebrated, and how we do that may be one of the ways in which we do it. But the other way, and I think this came out of our meeting yesterday, was that we probably need a concluding report when that project is finished, so that we can recognise the pluses and also those things that we might have learned lessons from. So I think, in the interest of fairness, we should do that once we've got confirmation that the project is complete, and that, I think, will be the best that we can do in terms of ensuring we have good balance and recognise the good things that worked well, as well as those things that haven't worked so well. Is that something that you would welcome? Okay, we'll bear that in mind. Thank you very much. Right, moving on then to item 9. Item 9 is responses of the council or the cabinet to committee reports or recommendations.
Yeah, just to note there that recommendations from the committee to full council regarding the outturn report and treasury management report were accepted at July full council.
Thank you. The next item I need your agreement for, because in order to assist both the Chief Executive and I think the leader, we have a request to bring forward items 11 and 14 so that they may be considered while they are here. Councillor Shires, do you have a point to raise at this?
I do. Unfortunately, I have a meeting with our LJP team in 1 hour. So if we do bring those items forward, I may not be present for my agenda items, just so the committee is aware.
So do you have a problem with us bringing those forward?
I will leave that to the committee to decide. Either myself or the chief executive and the leader of the council wouldn't be present for our item. So I'll leave that to the committee.
Okay, well, the proposal that I have is to bring forward item 11 as our next report, followed by item 14, which is the managing performance report, in order for that to happen. So would the committee be supportive of that? Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. Yes, that's a majority. Thank you. So we'll turn then to item 11, which is the budget monitoring report. Councillor Shires.
Thank you. I apologise to the committee. Looking forward to the work programme. I do place quite a large role in the programme, so you will hear me quite often, of which I apologise for. I'll keep this short because we've got quite a large agenda. If we look at page 54 and 55 of the report, you will see the information regarding the recommendations from 2 till 7, sorry. They're each individually under 4.1 to 4.8 for further context, which should help discussion. Obviously, we learned last year that the budget monitoring report can be quite changing at each iterative. And when we look at the full year overspend of 25,000 that's projected, we can see that that comes from the IT, which is an additional 40, and then the return from the Mammoth Marathon, which is 15, which gives us the balance of the 25 if we're going to look at it in basic levels. But I welcome questions on anything that we have here. And the other question that I would like to raise is this understandable by all members of the committee? Because in previous meetings, the finance reports have been quite difficult for committee members to get their heads around.
Okay. Open to members' questions. Councillor Cushing, followed by Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note, Councillor Shires, that we do have a number of additions to the budget from what was agreed in the February budget setting, the annual budget setting for council meeting. I understand some of those, like the Rural Payment Fund, the Prosperity Fund, are late additions to that, but just as concerned as there's more changes there than possibly we would have expected in the past. So is there a sort of systemic issue and concerns around sort of the finance team being able to cope with these changes?
Are you referring to the capital additions?
Yeah, item number 2 and item number 3 weren't in the February budget, and clearly I don't believe that the other ones were there either. But I will stand to be corrected on that. But anyway, there's more changes than we probably had in the past.
Yeah, of course. So for regarding item recommendation 2 on page 54, that's 4.4. The final line talks about the underspend in previous budgets, which means that this money could be carried forward and allocated. I think the difficulty with the Marham's footpath is the deterioration over the last 18 months. So this is more of a health and safety response rather than, I think the question would be, why have we not been more proactive in keeping the footpath in a good condition? And that would be a question for property services, which of course I can raise. With regards to 4.5, yes, unfortunately, our public convenience in Holt was hit by a car. And whilst that is 10 months ago, the hold up with that, I'm not entirely sure whether or not that was purely from insurance or purely from weather project scoping. So that's another question that I can raise and come back to you. But you are quite correct with the other ones being from external funding. So this is just something that's coming into the budget. So I can raise those questions and come back to you with an answer. That's fine.
Thank you. If I may make 2 other points, and actually one of them will be answering your question about the report itself. Yesterday in the Governance Risk and Audit Committee, it was revealed that we know that the audits are sort of 2 years behind, and in the past it's been the fact that Ernst & Young the external auditors haven't had the adequate resource to do that. Yesterday it was revealed that actually there had also been problems with the finance team, so we questioned that to make sure that there is adequate support going forward. Just I want to raise and make you aware that obviously it's something I do think we need to be aware of in terms of the support in the finance team in order to make sure that we have adequate resources in order to do this work. The second point I'd like to is actually answer your question around the report itself, which is something I do feel quite passionately about. I do think we have a lot more information in here than we probably need for a sort of a quarterly update report. We have lots of tables from Appendix B, which are the ones that goes to the detailed minutiae of the budget. I would be, well, I can't speak for other committee members, but somebody who is probably sort of often speaks on behalf of the Conservative Group of Finance Matters, I think it's probably rare that certainly in a quarterly meeting that people would delve into those figures. And I tend tend to look at the capital reserves, but I do think there's the quantity of information in here is certainly probably excessive for what we'd actually need for a quarterly update. And that's something I think we might be probably not resolved in this meeting, but that's something that might want to require an ongoing dialogue about. Thank you.
Councillor Shires.
Yeah, of course. So in response to 4.4 and 4.5 where you've raised, I wouldn't necessarily say that's a finance team. That looks like it's more an estates and property services issue, which sits in my portfolio. So I'll investigate the timeliness of those. We've got to try and get a fine balance, I think, between the information that we give and the information that's necessary. And what I've learned from all our meetings is that sometimes having everything in front of us leads to a better conversation rather than excluding parts. If what we're suggesting is perhaps we need a little bit more training to understand how these reports work and what people are actually looking for, then perhaps that's something we can get in house to support the committee, because they're not easy things to understand if it's not something you're looking at every day. And I would really hope that we can just make it easy for everybody so that we know where to go for the information.
Okay, thank you. You.
Yes, I'd actually extend. I think that's something that, as a principle, we ought to be doing for perhaps all the reports that come through. It's about, at the end of the day, the reports are produced ultimately for the benefit of the members who have to read them, digest them and understand them. And obviously getting the balance right between that, as you say, can vary from one report to the other. But I do think it'd be helpful if committee, even if it's a subcommittee of members of those committees at times go away and have a look at these things and have a dialogue with officers and the administration. I think that would benefit all of us.
Thank you. Yes. Can I just follow up on the point that Councillor Cushing raised? And I'm not privy to what happened at GRAC yesterday, but one of the concerns that we have to bear in mind is that the 2 previous years of accounts haven't been audited, and so there is a question about how confident can we be that those that the year start position, so that's this year start position, is a sound one and one that won't be subject to considerable change. And clearly the projected year end position would therefore be similarly affected. So I think that's a risk, and I'm not sure whether you considered that yesterday in the context of a risk or not, but I noticed that in section 9, that risk isn't one that's recognised, and I wonder why that's the case. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as Chairman of GRAC yesterday, we did discuss this. We discussed staffing issues as well, and the moves are being taken there. Yes, we raised the question of actually members and the risk to them not having sufficient knowledge or understanding. So that's been placed on the risk register. But you won't see it necessarily in the higher level ones, but it is in part of the system so that it's considered as the overall risk within that area. So yes, it is an acknowledged risk. In terms of can we be sure? The answer is no, but having said that, we're hopeful. I'm told yesterday by the end of this week I will be signing off 2021, so we will have moved closer. There is a plan that central government came out with recently, which is to set timescales, and I believe, and Officer Black's maybe able to help me. I think was it March for yes, it was March for the next one to be done by. So by next March, we should have the next one. So there should be a fairly rapid catch up so that whilst that is a risk, it's also my understanding from having posed questions and yesterday that the things that have caused significant concern elsewhere, because we are aware of other councils that have had issues, are not issues that are likely to be something that we're facing. We are in a good financial position. So whilst all the changes and all the things that were found during that report were primarily how things were recorded, there was not a change in the numbers or the balances. The only one that we're waiting on now is to do with pensions. And we're waiting for that. That was just the final one we need before we understand that one.
Yes,
So-
I understand that we're not the only council that's affected, and I understand the kind of the generic reasons as to why that's the case. It's just that it did occur to me that there is no recognition of that risk in section 9 of this report, and I just wonder why. Councillor Shire.
Yeah.
That isn't a question I can answer. Obviously, the risk is there. I've got full confidence in our finance team that they are doing as much as they can possibly do to minimise risk in that respect. But we do have to be mindful that audits are there for a reason. I can ask why it's not included. I don't know whether or not it's not included because of the context of the report, but I can ask the question and get back to the committee. So I've got 3 questions to answer, which I will give a written response to the committee over. That's fine.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Is it an urgent one, Councillor Vickers?
Well, it's just a very quick follow-up to what the question you raised, actually, Chairman, about the uncertainty of the accounts. That's been very much in my mind as part of overview and scrutiny and GRAC. So are we saying that North Norfolk District Council has done everything it possibly can do to allow the auditors to do their job, and that we're simply just waiting on the auditors?
Thank you. Mr. Blatch.
So to answer that question directly, there was a delay in the council's external auditor being able to sign off our 1920 accounts because of a Public Interest Disclosure Act referral. That issue was resolved in March of last year, and there was a comprehensive paper that was presented on the GRAC agenda. I think it was the 30th of March 2022, where those issues were closed down and successfully reported. That has led to a delay in subsequent annual audits because you can't conclude one audit until the previous audit has been concluded. And that has run at a time where there has been significant capacity issues within the audit service nationally across local government. So this isn't an issue which is peculiar to North Norfolk. It is on the National Risk Register, and Local Government Minister Rowley wrote to many local authorities in the middle of July over that issue. And then there was a DLUC briefing on the 1st of August, which was attended by Tina Stankley, your Section 151 officer and Director of Resources, who isn't able to be here today. So that email or that information was shared with the chair of GRAC and circulated to colleague members on GRAC yesterday. The issue is that as audits are then delayed, any subsequent statutory instruments or guidance needs to be reflected upon. So our ability to sign off subsequent audits in terms of backup pressure created within the finance service. So Councillor Toy referred to the issues that are outstanding on that we need to conclude or have needed to conclude for the 2020-21 accounts. There were a number of recommendations around a fixed asset register and how assets were assessed and determined. That doesn't apply to many district councils because they don't have fixed infrastructure. That largely applies to highway authorities where there is phased programme of improvement over restoration of works, because you have to, those assets are assessed over a 30-year lifetime. If a road is resurfaced during that time, you then have to take some allowance of depreciation. I'm not an accountant or an auditor. That's the most I know. We fell foul of that as district council because we have coastal infrastructure, which are district council assets. So if we now move forward with, there's an item, a cabinet item and an item for the full council next week on the Cromer Sea defences, they were subject to some improvement in investment in the last 20 years. There will have to be an allowance around depreciation when we take forward the next scheme. So that has delayed our ability. And then at the final hour hurdle, Councillor Toy talked about the triennial review of pensions, which is the only outstanding issue for the 2020-21 accounts. And the team are working with Ernst & Young around completion or auditing of the 21-22 accounts. The government guidance note suggests that they need to be completed by the end of March 2024, and we will endeavour to do that. But it isn't just about us now saying we've completed 21-22. 2020-21. We will have to get in the queue, as it were, for Ernst & Young to be able to come back and do those next years. So the issue Councillor Cushing raised around, is the finance team adequately resourced at the present time? No, it isn't. We are out for an advert at the moment for a chief technical accountant, and that will increase the capacity of the team. The team have worked very well in terms of managing the budgets, but they are not up to full strength.
Thank you for that, Mr. Balach. Just to be crystal clear, if the external auditors arrived here today, could they proceed with each of those audits?
They could move forward with the appraisal of the 21-22 accounts, because we have posted annual accounts for the year ending the 31st of March 2022. So that they should be able to move on that if they had the resource in the external audit team. That isn't an issue now for the council. They would have a series of questions, I would imagine. That is how audits work. They will review our annual statement of accounts. They will then raise some procedural issues around fixed assets or pension treatments or other liabilities that they deem the authority to have. And they would then be a conversation to close those issues down before their audit judgment is then issued. So if they arrived here tomorrow to talk about the 21-22 accounts, they would have the accounts at their disposal. I couldn't sit here in all honesty and say what questions they would ask as a result of the scrutiny of those accounts.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you very much for that response.
Right, I've got Councillor Holliday and then Councillor Housden.
Thank you, Chair. This is about the borrowing, page 52. We're borrowing 10 million to pay back 6.2 million. And this may be a function of me not understanding the report kept properly, but I didn't understand why we needed to borrow 2 tranches of 5 to pay back 6.2.
Councillor Shires.
That's the exact same question I've got written down next to that point. So when I next meet with Officer Stankley, that's the question I'm going to be asking. Thank you.
I think, Chair, that was a cash flow issue. So the government paid us COVID grants in advance, our administration of those COVID grants. We, in common with a number of coastal authorities, received a generous allocation because it was based on, I'm glad Mr. Knight is here, because it was based on our business rate assessment early in the pandemic. We have a large number of properties that are beach huts and chalets, and so they didn't then form part of the amount that we had to pay out as grant. And we were very diligent in our administration of holiday homes that are business rated as against second homes, and so we did see more money paid to us. We'd invested that money, and then there was a call on that money before the 31st of March, and we weren't given much notice from our government of that, and so we didn't have cash that we could draw upon from our internal resources, so we did have to go for some short-term borrowing to repay that grant back.
Thank you. I understand that it's the quantity, but Councillor Shires is going to provide me with the detail as to why we needed to borrow 10 million in order to pay back 6.2. So thank you very much.
You're content with that?
Yeah, so just for clarity for the committee, there is it's 2 borrowing amounts of 5 million, and the figure that we've been given for that borrowing was 6.2. So that's the clarity that we're going to seek.
Okay.
I think it's also to do with parish precepts. So we collect council tax on a phased basis over 10 or 12 instalments by many people, and we pay parish precepts twice in April or May and October. And so there is an advance that we would, and again, it's about cash flow. It's not a significant borrowing issue.
Okay. Councillor Housden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just point 4.5, just Zurich Municipal. I see that the projected budget is 370. I just wondered why we're seeking to claim 120 and not the full reinstatement cost, or whatever the insurance policy might state.
Well, Councillor Shires, I think.
Steve and I are fighting over responding. So we are seeking to improve the facility that is there, as you can see, through the change in place and the investment in the carbon neutral design. And that's the reason why we would need more rather than repairing the building as it is. So we're putting a new building there rather than just repairing the existing building, which we wouldn't be able to do the improvements that we want to do to, if that makes sense.
Okay. Fine, thank you.
Mr. Latch.
So the building was subject of a collision by a car in a public car park. It took out the corner of the building and shifted the building backwards. So about 40% of the existing building is compromised. We have money at Holt through the government's Changing Places Fund to deliver a Changing Places in that town facility. We've taken the opportunity and having agreed the position with our insurers that they will settle at 120,000. We would put in additional money as from the district council to replace that facility, as we have done at Wells, Fakenham and North Walsham in recent times. And we will use the £30,000 for the Changing Places facility to provide a new facility rather than patching up or reinstating a dated facility. There is a choice around that. The issue that Councillor Cushing asked around the adjustments to the programme reflect when that advice was received from the insurers. We didn't have that information when the budget was set in February this year. The accident took place last November. So
Okay.
there's an opportunity to do better with that project.
Yes. It's the old matter of betterment, I think, creeping in there. Thank you. Okay, any other questions in relation to this report, or are we all done? Okay, can I have a proposer then that we go with the recommendations set out 1 to 7 on page 45. I've got Councillor Penfold and Councillor Ball. Can I have a show of hands then, please? Thank you. That looks unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, moving then on to item 14, which is the performance management report. Councillor Adams.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Well, starting with good performance for this quarter. However, of course, we know about the pressures in housing, which are unrelenting, with limited turnover in tenancies and continued constraints around development. Despite some recent announcements, we are and continue to work in an extremely challenging landscape in this respect. And I understand numbers of households in temporary accommodation are sitting somewhere around 65 due to homelessness presently. This quarter, we've also launched the Invest North Norfolk platform, and I believe we've received appreciable levels of contact, particularly relating to queries on grants. So thank you to the team for that work. In addition to this, the Cedars has 60% tenancies agreed in principle, with further solid interest, and there was a successful open day last week, I think attended by many of the committee. We've also carried out some additional capital investment as detailed in previous reports, helping to support businesses and meet net zero goals. And as you can see later on in the report, the customer contact has increased significantly in this quarter, despite achieving an improvement in waiting times. So that's quite interesting. But telling, I suppose, of the sort of pressures in terms of people getting in touch. Members will also be familiar with the work being undertaken with the Youth Council, which is very welcome. Obviously, we had a presentation at the previous full council meeting that continues to go very well. The works to the solar array at the Reef have subsequently finished following this quarter and are detailed in the copy of the Outlook currently being sent to households. And as you can imagine, it's been performing extremely well up until perhaps yesterday. And the leisure centres generally continue to exceed our expectations in terms of use and membership. We've also previously praised the work of the R&I lifeguards and for a full council meeting. I believe it was the last time, perhaps the one before. And I know they've continued to see a very busy summer this year, and for that I thank them again. The public toilet works at Fakenham have subsequently finished, and following works at North Walsham attention will of course go to Holt and Albert Street, as we've previously discussed. As detailed, council tax collections remains very strong and something we continue to recognise, so truly exemplary performance there, and thank you for that continuing. So I feel this quarter, whilst we transition to the new corporate plan, I believe this sets the scene for the year and the years ahead. So I don't have anything further to say. Minded of the time, it's got to get out shortly, but happy to stay for a few questions or any conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Questions? Councillor Holliday.
Thank you. I've got two questions. Is that okay, Chair? Two questions, okay?
Indeed, fire away.
The first one's about housing, which I echo Councillor Adams's view on, and I note that we're asked to propose topics that we should be that could be usefully considered by Cabinet, and I wondered if housing was one of them. I understand the main causes of homelessness, and our numbers are quite high, is the friends or family can no longer help, and domestic violence and the end of private rentals. And I was just wondering if Cabinet could have any levers in those areas, so possibly we could work to, at a fairly granular level, actually help with those. And the other question, the second part of my first question, is about affordables, and I understand we have slightly lower numbers of affordables, and that we've got 100+ applications waiting on approval in total, not of affordables, but I wondered if affordables could be prioritised over other applications when the nutrient neutrality matter gets solved, if it does. So that was question number one, so perhaps that could be answered before I get on to question number two.
Multi-part first,
yeah,
before moving on to second.
Yeah.
Councillor Adams.
Okay, so I will, defer to Councillor Fredericks on the first point about the drivers for homelessness, but of course, don't forget the biggest probably evictions. In fact, we've got a significant number of them. You've got overcrowding, so you've got all sorts of factors that lead these things. But we certainly are doing very good work around domestic violence, and of course, there are other issues with family breakdown, etc., that cause this. So, but on the second point, I agree with you, and I know it's something Councillor Andrew Brown is concerned about, that sort of how we prioritise, if you like, those applications once we're in the space to approve many of them. It's not a conversation I've personally had with officers as such, so it's not something I can sort of add anything to. But there are many businesses, of course, that are struggling, who are waiting to carry out those developments too. So there's got to be a balance there somewhere, I believe. But I think it's a valid question. Thank you.
So just before we move to Councillor Fredericks, is that a prompt for a conversation to happen along those lines?
I understand there may have been some conversations already, but I can't comment further because I haven't been involved other than the question being posed. I can't comment on. I don't know if any officer can advise on that point, but I do think it's an interesting point of conversation, certainly.
Okay, Mr. Folger or Mr. Williams.
I think it's going to be me, Chair. Thank you. I'm Russell Williams. I'm your relatively new Assistant Director for Planning. So yes, those conversations are starting. I'm sure councillors will have picked up the national news about the government's plans to kind of remove nutrient neutrality from being an issue as a consideration within residential schemes. By their announcements, that should be sorted by early 2024. Clearly, it needs to go through Parliament first, so it remains to be seen. But we have in excess of 100 applications before this council that are held up, in inverted commas, related to nutrient neutrality, and how we sensibly feed them into the system will be a challenge, and Councillor Brown is interested in that. And to me, affordable housing is a relevant consideration, because that it's not the only one. There will be something about how ready they are to be determined. There'll be something about fairness, bluntly, how long have we had them for, that sort of thing. And there are others, one or two, that have already been to committee and were held up in March, whichever year it was, 2022, I think, when Natural England brought in the neutrality stuff. So very happy to factor that into the work we have started. And I know Councillor Brown is taking a keen interest in the subject.
Are you content with that as your first question response? Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Fredericks. Before you answer that one, yes, Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question, Councillor Halliday, and thank you, Mr. Williams, as well. Yes, we're doing a piece of work with an independent consultant about how to bring more affordable houses forward in the planning system, so that we can sort of iron out any wrinkles and get those affordable homes forward before anything else, because that is our major concern, is our homelessness figures. It's also to do with people that are starting out in life as well, that are working and need somewhere to live, and we have an employment crisis along with every other crisis that's been thrown at us, that we need carers, we need people to work in restaurants and low paid employment, but we haven't got anywhere to house them. So it's a really complex subject, which is why in your calendars you should have an invitation for a working group. So that's where we're inviting you all to come and be part of the conversation about homelessness and housing, and really thrash it out with us and see if you've got any ideas that you can bring forward that we haven't thought of, because we don't know everything. We really don't. So it's part of that conversation. So I would really, really encourage you to come forward and help us with that. And that will form our action plan. We have our housing strategy, which was brought in on 2021 when I first became portfolio holder. In those 2 years, my goodness, hasn't the world changed? So we're going to be refreshing that as well. So part of that workshop will be to do with that too. There is another implication that not all affordable housing developments are purely affordable housing developments. So developers will have obligations to provide affordable housing on their developments. And as you probably realise, I'm a great advocate for getting those affordable housings done first. But there is the argument that they have to sell houses to actually provide the affordables. And as you know, I'm a very strong, I can't even say the word properly without feeling passionate about it, but advocate for affordable housing to be bought first. So I hope that helps. I'm always happy to have a conversation. Thank you very much for your question.
Okay, Councillor, thank you for that, Councillor Fredericks. Certainly you've promoted the opportunity of the workshop. I'm not sure that you've added very much in terms of an answer to the primary question, but I accept that that's a major sort of issue that I raise that rhetorically.
Oh,
so,
okay.
But Councillor Holliday, are you content with that first question response?
Yes, let's see can we see how that goes, and then see if anything else is needed afterwards, how the workshop goes.
Right, okay.
Yeah. The second question is about customer service. And I was wondering if you could help me understand the variation in call times and whether there are any lessons to be learned. Because if you look at the number of phone calls, they're fairly stable. There are 4,442 in April and 4,652 in June. That's sort of bobbling along, not terribly different in this quarter anyway, but the call time varies from 9 minutes 18 in April to 4.25 in June. And when in fact the call numbers are going in the opposite direction. And the customer, I couldn't get into in-phase just now, but the customer call team numbers I think are fairly stable. So I don't quite understand why the call numbers of the call time weights are so variable when the other factors are fairly constant. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Councillor Withington, are you sort of stepping in place of Councillor Adams? I know this is actually your portfolio, so fire away if that's the case.
Right, thank you. Thank you for your question. I think customer service is one of the interesting ones in terms of some of the data, because as you quite rightly say, it does fluctuate through the year. It is very dependent on the time of the year in terms of what's coming in. So April time, there are huge numbers of increase due to garden bin services. So we have particular periods in the year when recovery letters are going out, etc., where there will be considerable increases in the number of customer contacts. And I think that's been true as well with the cost of living, in that we've had more calls related to that as well. So we are working on trying to bring in changes to resourcing so that we can be more flexible, so that when we can anticipate that those times are now, which I think is going to help with responding more quickly to some of those calls. We've also changed the system recently slightly so that we have level 1 and level 2 callers, handlers who can deal, the level 2s dealing with more complex cases, but we've now got the system so that level 1s, if there isn't a level 2 handler available, the level 1s can take that call and sort out the response to it, so to ensure that there's a follow-on. So that's happened, but we're also working on getting more information online, and very excitingly this week, officers will be aware, because they have been testing out the chatbot and giving her intelligence and finding the answers to her questions, that we have gone live with the chatbot for North Norfolk District Council. So that will hopefully increase capacity in that people can find information and get contacts online where possible as well, directly at their own convenience, rather than having to find a time. So there's lots of things going on in the background, but the main reason is that what comes into council is very dependent on particular timescales for things that are going on.
Okay, thank you. You content with that?
I totally understand that. I wonder if it's the complexity of question, actually, because in April there weren't as many calls as there were in June, but the time taken for those calls to get through was twice as long. So I think there's something other than it's not just the volume of calls, and perhaps in April there are some much more complex topics coming in, and it's not just bins, presumably don't take an awful, Steve, I don't want to be rude or anything, but bins don't take that long, do they, to talk about? But there may be complex benefit changes that would take a long time. So that there may be.
Can I come in there? One of the interesting things when you sit with the call handlers is it may come in as a garden bin query, but our staff are very good at engaging with the customers, and it may be that garden bin inquiry has come in because they've just moved house. So we then pick up on a council tax, a change of data thing, and something can be one simple inquiry that turns into several. And that's the advantages of having the one front door, in that we're resolving issues. So rather than us getting hung up on somebody's waiting for such a long time, I think it's about looking about what's being resolved at the front door of the council, and not going through and creating more work for back office staff as well.
Okay. Officer Hems, I saw your finger was poised.
It was indeed. You're absolutely right, Councillor Harday. It's not just about volume, it's about the complexity. And as Councillor Withington has said, we have different times of the year where callers will ring about different things. So you can imagine in April, there will be a lot of people will have received their council tax bills and things such as that. And so some of those issues where people are ringing about slightly more complex issues will take longer to deal with, and therefore that correlation between volume and time doesn't always, it isn't a constant correlation. So you will get more complex cases coming in that will take officers more time. And also, as Councillor Withington has said, some people will ring the council and deal with a number of issues all at once, which is a good thing. We're moving steadily towards a position
of using technology to enable people to serve themselves as much as possible at a time that's convenient for themselves. And I think that's a positive that will continue to move forward over time. That said, we'll continue to resource so that people are able to make phone calls when they feel more comfortable to be able to do that, but also to be able to come into the office when required and actually deal with someone face to face where necessary.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Housden.
Thank you. I just sort of taking an overview of what is here. I just wonder if we have a problem in the content of staff shortages, because we've just questioned earlier on about the audit, which crops up in these charts, but also we've got the support for benefit claims, and we've got also the warm homes, and they are figures that are down, that through no fault other than it appears to be understaffed. And I wonder just generally what the position is, because it does seem that there are staff shortages which are actually creating some of the delays in here. And the warm homes, I think, has to be delivered by March 24, and yet, we're way behind. And it's just a general question and an overview of the information that's in front of me, really.
Can I, Councillor Adams?
Yeah, I mean, certainly capacity is an issue, obviously, for every council now, and of course, it's often compounded by our health. I think you're right to mention, the areas you did in terms of the warm homes benefits, etc. I mean, some of those matters have obviously moved on since this particular report, but ongoing in terms of the audit, for instance, as you heard, there is a vacancy advertised, so it's a changing piece really, and things do move on. But as we move forward, there will be other staff absence, of course, affecting some delivery. So it's a factor we obviously experience from time to time across the organisation, affecting different things. And also, of course, it's very difficult to recruit into certain areas. So that's another issue that we have to deal with.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Blatch.
There isn't any significant issue in terms of staff vacancy against our establishment numbers. There was a joint staff consultative committee last week where James Claxton, HR manager, presented data about our turnover relative to other authorities, and indeed the speed of our recruitment processes and the numbers of people applying for roles with the authority. Going back to the finance papers, obviously we set a budget at the beginning of the year, and we have to operate within that largely, with some flexibility to via or flex budgets. But overall, the budget of the authority is fixed. And in terms of those frontline services around benefits, homelessness, we are seeing an increase in demand over previous years because of the economic situation. And the issue around warm homes is, I thought, was addressed in the report, in that says we have approved fewer grants than we had anticipated. That's about contractor capacity locally and the complexity of the fund, and that's not a unique situation to North Norfolk. We do have an officer as part of the warm homes programme, an energy efficiency officer that works in partnership with the warm home programme at Norfolk level. I think 5 of the authorities form part of that partnership, but that is a challenge in terms of contractor availability.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I travel quite considerably, and I'm involved in many other things. And whilst I know when I'm on overview and scrutiny, some people think I'm here to criticise, but it's not a case of criticising. I just think we're now moving into an incredibly different time when we have to look at strategy, but strategy way beyond what's gone before us. The question about staffing. I've been into the wildest depths of Scotland, where are the pub restaurants which have featured as Michelin stars that have closed because they simply can't get staff. And I think it's not just Norfolk, and I know we're talking about a review and perhaps working parties. It's right through this country, and I think, I'm not saying it's an answer tomorrow, but I do think we've got to look way beyond strategically for the next 5 to 10 years, because this problem is not going to go away in any shape or form. Thank you.
You make a good point, I think, Councillor Howsden. Councillor Cushing next. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go to page 116, where she mentions the Fakenham roundabout, which was the prelude to the Fakenham urban extension, and for Officer Williams's benefit, that's actually will be built in my North Fakenham ward. Now I appreciate Officer Fulcher has kept me well briefed in terms of what's been happening on this, but I just wonder if you have a view, given the announcement by the government to try and mitigate the neutrality regulations issued by Natural England last year, whether you have a view whether that makes it more likely that the urban extension and roundabout will proceed next year, or do we still have to wait for the legislation to throw through Parliament in the next 6 weeks to understand what the full implications are before we can take a view on that?
Mr. Fulcher.
So we will have to wait for the legislation to be passed, obviously, to have that certainty. But I've spoken to the developer. They are confident that they would be able to deliver if nutrient neutrality mitigation measures are resolved in time. So between now and then, the role for me is to apply for the variation of the grants from Norfolk County Council to be carried over to next financial year. So that's the first action for me, and I'm actually been approached this week to undertake that. So if we can secure the finance, the only barrier will be the mitigation measures, which we've heard are confident that they'll be resolved next year. Providing they are in the timescale that we've been indicated, there's every likelihood that that infrastructure would be delivered next year, because the target date is the autumn. So that would allow for that to happen. But obviously I can't confirm that sitting here today, but every indication is that it will be possible. And certainly every single action that we're taking will allow that to happen, should the developer choose to do so at the time.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Howsden.
Yes, can I just follow that question up, actually, because it's pertinent in my ward. Where once the nutrient neutrality situation is resolved, will there be any chance to give priority to those consents where there's a Section 106 agreement?
So there are current applications being considered. They should be determined well in time for that. So I don't imagine that we'll need to prioritise them, providing they will be approved. But Mr. Williams is dealing with those. Is currently my focus at the moment is just securing the finance to make sure that the money's available, because that's the key issue. As we've heard previously, the inflationary costs has added £1 million to this project over the last year, which the developer has agreed to fund that gap. But obviously there is a limit to how far that can go. So securing the monies that we've promised and via the Norfolk County Council is the starting point. So that's our priority right now. The planning, I'm not aware of the planning applications being problematic, but obviously they will need to take due process.
Fine, okay. It's just that I know that one particular scheme was literally within hours of being signed, 106 was being signed, and then bang, we have Natural England's neutrality. Okay, thank you.
I think the operative or pivotal part of your question was once it's been resolved, and I think within that there could well be a lot of detail that would influence what we as a planning authority can do and the order in which we can do it. So I think until we get a bit more detail around that, that's probably an open question. But Mr. Williams, you may have the answer to that question.
No, I'm probably going to cloud the situation slightly further, I suspect. But I think both councillors are right. There are a number that are held up in what I might call the Section 106 stage. They were effectively at the finish line at that point. They'd been through committee. There were one or two that, as has been inferred, effectively were just waiting for the signatures to be put on the Section 106 agreement before the planning permission is issued. Now, conceptually, they should be relatively easy to get going at the requisite moment, but equally, we will have to check that the signatories to the 106 are the same as they were 18 months ago, and bluntly, what somebody thought was fine 18 months ago, they may not think is fine now. So I wouldn't give an absolute carte blanche guarantee that stuff was at the finish line is going to toddle over the finish line at the relevant point on exactly the same basis. I don't think the council's position will have changed, but it's possible other parties might take a different view, and we will need to check with everybody, which hopefully we will get organised and do in advance rather than wait for the thing to be changed and then start asking the questions, that they're prepared to proceed as previously planned.
Thank you. I think that's another caveat or two in there. So yeah, it's good to hear that you're on the case and thinking it through. And should we get a green light that we can proceed with those, then yeah, it would be really good to kind of see them coming forward. So thank you for that. Right. I don't have any other hands unless there's any latecomers. Are we all done on this report? Okay, then can I have a proposer? And the recommendation is that we as a committee be invited to consider and comment. We've commented on quite a number of points there, and give subsequent consideration by cabinet. So do I have a proposer and a seconder, please? I've got Councillor Penfold and Councillor Reynolds. And can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. That looks unanimous. Thank you very much. Right. So that's item 14 completed. We now return back to item 10, which is the debt recovery report 22-23. So I don't know who's going to cover for Councillor Shires, but Councillor Toy, you look as though you're getting into the starting blocks there.
Yeah, I've received the fastball, Mr. Chairman. So yes, obviously I'm trying to present this from a position of last minute. But essentially, in terms of the debt recovery, the important thing I think I was asked to highlight is that in terms of business rates, we're in the top in Norfolk and the top 5% nationally in business rate collection. In terms of council tax, we're the top 11% nationally and second, I believe, in Norfolk. There is some on page 21 of the report. I don't know what that is electronically. It explains at the top of table 5, whilst there was some issues during the pandemic, we saw a significant shift from the number of people claiming housing benefit, moving across to claim their housing benefit through universal credit. That's made recovery harder because housing benefit can't be reclaimed directly from universal credit. So, and I see there's some notes here that Councillor Shires will be challenging that further on. So I think from that point of view, I'll leave it there because you have the report in front of you, and I will endeavour to either answer questions if I can, and if not, make sure that written answers are received for you.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for stepping into the breach there. Questions? Councillor Holliday?
Thank you, Chair. I found this quite a difficult report to understand, but I've been fortunate enough to have a very helpful session with the revenues manager, and I'm totally sorted. So thank you very much indeed for that. But I did find that I would be struggling hugely without that very valuable input. Thank you.
I think we all probably struggle sometimes across the spectrum of reports that we consider. You seem to be particularly adept, I think, on performance management. So we've all got our strengths and weaknesses. Right. So that's fine. Thank you. And Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a guide as to what would have made it easier for you, if I can feed that back? What was it in that conversation that made it clearer for you that maybe could be included in the report?
There's quite a lot of technical jargon that I needed to have explained, which no doubt you guys will all have at your fingertips. But and the COVID movements were obviously blindingly obvious once you thought about them. But if you hadn't got them in your mind, that was quite a difficult concept to write. It's a very complicated period to work your way through, I think, with the COVID monies coming in and out. But also, I felt it could have a bit of a glossary, possibly.
Okay, jargon busting.
It's nice. It's beautifully presented. It's nice and clear. It's not too long. The tables are very helpful. It's just I didn't understand everything in the tables. But
okay, now I'll feed that back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Gosh, shower of hands. I think spot yours first, councillor Penfold, councillor Housden.
Thank you. Well, it was just a support, actually. I think a glossary would be a good idea. I mentioned, I think, a couple of points yesterday in GRAC about having a key to symbols, which can be quite confusing. So a glossary of terms, I think, would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Housden.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I had highlighted this point on page 35. During the pandemic, we saw a significant shift from the number of people claiming housing benefit moving across to claim their housing costs through universal credit instead. This has made recovery of housing benefit more difficult and time consuming as we're not allowed to recover directly from universal credit. It would be good to understand the process here. Now, I know that might not be an answer immediately, but where this change was instigated or how it was instigated and how we're sort of having to deal with it. That would be quite interesting to know that, please. It doesn't have to be, it can be a written answer to that.
That'll be fine, yes. Unless you want to offer something, Officer Kelly.
Yeah, Officer Knight, our Revenues Manager. In regards to interestingly.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
That's all right. That's okay, Chair.
I'm getting my Sean's mixed up.
That's fine. In regards to this paper, just some of the complexities are actually, we're trying to do it in a corporate debt paper, but actually it covers a number of services. So obviously you've got housing benefit, which is benefits. Sundry income is actually in finance, and then you've got revenues, which is council tax and business rates. So I'm trying to pull all the information together, although I don't necessarily manage those services. In regards to housing benefits, universal credit was the big thing that was going to bring everything together. It brought council tax support in to a certain level, but housing benefit hasn't been. Housing benefit is the one where if we do the assessment, which is outside, we have to then collect it. It's really hard. And actually, the one thing I will say about housing benefit overpayments and the collection, you don't hear a lot about the DWP benefits overpayments. And the reason for that is they're very poor, unfortunately. So from a local council perspective, I like to wave the flag for North Norfolk and also councils generally, where you all know in lots of services we go above and beyond, like you councillors will do as well. And unfortunately, you know, housing benefit is one of these ones where we do the calculation, we do the assessment, we have to collect it. The big plus with housing benefit overpayments is that we can actually go to HMRC and get information, and that has helped us in the last few years, although anybody who's obviously been on benefits, and even if they get a job, clearly it might not mean they've suddenly got loads of money there to pay off these debts. There's clearly fraud involved in some cases. It could be error, it could be fraud, and it's quite a complicated business. I'd like to thank Councillor Toy for representing us. The reason is a bit rushed. I'm actually also due to go to the peer challenge meeting, so I'm sort of hovering, about to go. I know I'm late, so I've already sent the message, so I'll be a few minutes late because I like to try and give you some information to help this paper. Can I just bring to your attention, one of the recommendations in this paper is to increase the delegated authority for myself and the team leaders and the section 151 to make decisions on write-offs slightly higher than what it is before. So, for example, team leaders previously were up to £2,000 limit. We're asking to double that to £4,000. Myself, I was up to £10,000 on write-offs. We've asked to increase that to £20,000. And this is in connection with our section 151 Director of Finance. She's actually supporting this to make us more efficient rather than get maybe more people involved when it's obviously at a high level when there's maybe not needed. Also, Tina Stankley, section 151, to have the option to write off up to 30 grand in liaison with the portfolio member. So she won't do it on her own, she'll have to talk to the portfolio member, and anything over 30,000 would go, again, the finance director with the portfolio member, or it would also go to the chief exec. He'll be involved with the portfolio member. So it's a joint decision to make sure that not officer or member have got that on their own. They can discuss it. It's very rare to have them kind of cases at that kind of level, but occasionally we do. Unfortunately, with write-offs, some of you might not be aware of this, but some of the write-offs, like insolvency, we've got nothing we can do about that. If it's insolvent, we have to cancel the debt up to the date of insolvency. So we have to then just respond to that information coming from receivers. So sometimes, unfortunately, the levels of write-offs could be higher because of that kind of reason. The other common reason for write-offs is gonaways. And as I was talking to Councillor Holiday yesterday, the thing about gonaways is we might write off a debt because we can't find someone, but we can reverse it. If we come across that person or we find information later on, we'll reverse the write-off and collect it. So we don't stop there. And on that point, I'd just like to say, since April, these figures in this report is up to 31st of March, the end of the financial year. We obviously still collect last year's council tax and business rates, also any other arrears for previous years. So I've written down a couple of figures here I'd like to share with you just to give you an idea. On council tax, we've actually, just get the right figures, make sure I give you the right ones. The arrears, sorry, on business rates, arrears were 329,000 in total. We've actually collected 200,000 since 1st of April off those arrears. So now the arrears will be 129,000 at the moment as we speak. They can go up during the year because people can have changes. So just they don't want, it doesn't always mean it goes down. And council tax, 4.1 million was the arrears. We've collected for previous year's arrears since April, 759,000. So that's now come down about 3.3 million. So we don't stop there. So sorry, just a little bit of information we might find helpful.
I think there was quite a bit of information in there, actually. Thank you. You'd actually forestalled one of my questions, which was, what is the intended benefit of the raising of those limits? And I think if I captured your words correctly, that was about efficiencies.
Yes, it was. And as you're aware, in the corporate plan going forward, it's one of the things we're looking at is to make sure we're more flexible and more efficient in how we do things. And that was one of the conversations I referred to. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Does that provide a sufficient answer?
Yes, it does. I mean, just on the write-offs or the ability to write certain amounts off, I just would, like to know that these figures are sort of relevant to the industry standard, if you like, and that we're not sort of sailing ahead of the game in the amount of write-offs. I mean, £30,000 is quite a lot of money to write off, and I'm not suggesting it would be written off flippantly, but of course it still is a very big sum of money.
Indeed, it is. Yes, if it's quick.
I'll make it quick. There is guidance around how we have to deal with write-offs, and there's no revenue officer in my team who'd ever want to write off something they can't get hold of. So I can assure you that is not something we'll do flippantly. The guidance is there. If anything, one of the things we need to do is to manage some of the arrears more quickly, and actually that might lead to write-off. So the numbers could go up next year, probably because we're more on top of that, which is what we're trying to do at the moment.
Thank you, Officer Knight. And
just very quickly to cover off your original question of where did it come from in terms of that so it's a government scheme that they rolled out where it enabled claimants basically to have one payment of benefit where they were getting a number in previous. It doesn't affect all of our claimants. People can come direct to us if it's just for housing benefit or for council tax support, but effectively where they are getting other benefits that are provided by DWP, it wraps it up. It's those bits where we can't necessarily do the recovery in the way we would have done previously, because we can't necessarily just recover through their universal credit.
Right.
So it's generated because of the way in which the government have introduced, or the way in which universal credit has been implemented and worked. It's designed to be more efficient for the applicant for that benefit.
And less efficient for us.
It doesn't necessarily make it better from our perspective.
Fine, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Hems. Any others? Are we all done on debt recovery report? Okay, we've got two recommendations here to approve the annual report giving the details of write-offs in accordance with the council's debt write-off policy and performance in relation to revenue collection, to approve the suggested changes to the delegated authority as shown in Appendix 2 for write-offs. Can I have a proposer and a seconder then? Councillor Fisher and Councillor Beattie, thank you. A show of hands then, please. That looks like unanimous to me. Thank you very much. Right, so that's item 10 completed. We've done 11. We move now to item 12, which is the enforcement update for September 23. Now, we don't have a cabinet member, I don't think, covering that. So, Mr. Folger, Mr. Williams, I think it may be your act.
No problem.
Thank you.
So good morning, enforcement update. I mean, it is an auditor report, so really it's just a case if there's any clarification needed about any of the points that have been raised. I would just say that, of course, the cases that I've referred to in the report are live cases. So it is difficult for me to say too much about where we are, obviously, given that we're live streaming. But I'm more than happy to have offline discussions with members should they wish. But we are ensuring that ward members are kept up to date with the significant cases within their wards. But obviously, if there's any clarification needed, happy to answer any questions, or Mr. Williams will take it if it's something that he's dealing with. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I've got Councillor Cushing, Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd say I'm actually I'm not really sold on this update. It's very wordy, and I have to say, having read it, don't really understand whether it's getting better or getting worse in terms of what the position is on the enforcement. I think it would benefit from having an executive summary which pulled out the key points. We've been talking about what information we get. I think also it would benefit from having a table in there which perhaps showed all the number of open enforcement actions and probably when they were first opened, so we got a timeline, so we can get a perspective then of whether we've got things. And I know, for example, I have one in my ward which obviously has been extremely helpful getting resolved, which is actually on the way to being sorted out, but that was sitting there for 4 years now, which takes a long time. I know from previous discussions we've had, some of these things can take a lot of time to sort out. But also perhaps on the plus side, it'd be helpful to see how many have actually been closed in the period as well, so we can sort of get that measure of progress. So let's give an update on what other things are better, worse, or better. That would be helpful. Thank you.
I think it's just probably worth pointing out that the enforcement board and this update is specifically around those significant cases, of which there's only 18 of those. So this isn't your day-to-day enforcement issues. I do touch on those in the enforcement team update, and I do provide some figures about how many cases we've had this year, how many we have closed. You can see that real-time figures in those, and that's for the vast majority of cases come into that bracket. With the enforcement boards, there are 18, and they are clearly those that are long-standing issues. And out of the 18, I've only pulled out 4 for this report. They'll be familiar to most members, and certainly existing members who have been on this administration for a while. Things like the Tatterset Business Park and 9 Norris Street, long-standing ones. So of the 18 that we've got, 4 of them are in relation to one property, for example, which is Melton Constable Hall, which is a very difficult technical subject to resolve. Hence why we're not seeing too much movement on those. I referred to 2 others that are being monitored, Arcady and the King's Head in Hovton, so that's already brought us up to 6. I've named 4 cases where there has been movement, albeit relatively slow, given the nature of the beast. So that's already 10 of the 18. There's not too many left. Of the ones that are left, they're mainly financial issues around Mr. Knight and his work of collection of monies, because this is a combined enforcement. So it's not just planning enforcement. Its main purpose when it was set up was to bring forward empty properties back into use. So I'd say 1/3 of the cases are just that, and we are doing that. But 3 or 4 of the properties all belong to the same person. I'm not going to name on this call. So in effect, that's all of the ongoing cases. But I take your point, and a summary would be good, and maybe just a refresh of how we format this report more generally. But just so we're clear, it is about those significant cases that the enforcement board look at. It's not intended to give a full enforcement update. That's more Mr. Williams' domain as part of the development committee.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. It might be clear just to state that's actually what it is in their preface, I think, in that sense. Because I thought it was a broader update than that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. In that vein, I might just point out 1 or 2 things that might help, if you like, in kind of sharpening it up. If we look on page 3 of the report, the second bullet point down, where it refers to Tatterset and the outloading of the tyres, it says in recent months. I think it might be simpler to put whatever the figure is that gives us a more accurate dimension then, because recent is a lot of things to a lot of people. So if we can do that, if we move down to paragraph 3.1, there are 3 mentions of a number. In different contexts, I understand, but there are 3 mentions there. At least 2 of those could well be meaningful metrics. So I think that's the kind of thing that would help. And also, if I could just draw your attention to paragraph 4.5, I couldn't quite, I may have got this wrong, but where it says in 4.5, that's on page 4 of the report, there is a reduction to the current caseload down to 206 current cases, a drop from the 164 reported in December. So by my maths, 206 is greater than. So I take it that's the logic of that is not quite right.
Either that or it's a drop of 164. I would have to check that with the enforcement team leader. They're his figures.
So I think if we can just kind of sharpen it up in those respects, that would be helpful. Thank you. I've got Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question around page 89, and I think it's page 89. 9 Norwich Street, Fakenham, which seems to be becoming a hardy perennial on the agenda. So I'm just wondering if you could confirm when a CLT report will be submitted to Cabinet, and what steps are being taken to recover all the monies owed to the council from the freeholder of the property. Thank you.
So I think Mr. Fulcher has passed that one to me. I've picked up the lead on that in the last few days and weeks, and are getting up to speed and are talking to the key people in the next 24 hours or so as it happens. I would anticipate we would get to a conclusion as to what action the council wishes to take or not take during this calendar year. That doesn't mean that's the conclusion of the issue. Okay, but that I think we need to, from what I've seen, push towards a decision as to what action it is appropriate or not appropriate to take, and to do that in a reasonably speedy spell from here. It's not that I'm trying to avoid the question. I'm not in a position to comment on the second question at this point. I haven't got to that level of detail yet.
Okay.
Right. We'll be updated on that second part of the question in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Chair. My question's about 4.5, the enforcement team update and the number of cases that have been closed, and what percentage of the closures are due to enforcement having been taken, and how many of them have been due to enforcement not needing to be taken. Have you got those metrics, or is that?
No, but I could get those quite quickly to you
Yeah.
After the meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll leave that action with you. Councillor Hurlston.
Yeah, just slightly more specific, but really detailing on Councillor Cushing's point. If we just take Tatterset, I know it's probably not the best one to be taking, but it would be good just, if we can with some of these, to have perhaps a potential end date. Now, that's not a good example for that one, I know. But it would be good to know where we've got enforcement proceedings moving forward, the potential end date, worst case scenario, best case scenario. Then it's a revolving situation for this committee. It's a little bit in line with what we were discussing yesterday, and it gives us that clear, or the clarity of where we are at any one point in time with any specific enforcement action.
Yeah, that's noted. Something like, so looking at the report we've got, so out of those, Sutton Mill, for example, has got a date where we're expecting that to be concluded on. Tatterset, as you say, not a good example, because but we have reported in various committees and in various other places that that's probably a 2-year lifetime for that. Tadasset, for example, is the tyres are being removed at a rate of 1 or 2 containers per week, and at that rate, it will take around 2 years. Although there is investment by the owner to increase that production, he has recently taken on more staff. He's doubled the staff. He's bought new equipment, but there's a environmental legislation means he's limited in how many he can do. You've heard 9 Norris Street. It's quite difficult at this time, but we will be able to be more definitive when Mr. Williams has concluded his work. But yeah, where possible, certainly agree that would be useful, and I'll endeavour to do that.
Yeah, it just gives us that full picture. So that, and indeed, with that full picture, we may spend less time discussing and questioning any elements of them.
Indeed. So thank you for that. Any other questions? I have one, but I must declare an interest because it's in my ward. So from that point of view, I need to ask you about the King's Head Houghton. I'm mindful that it is a joint Broads Authority North Norfolk District Council. It falls into that kind of difficult area. But your brief mention there, in summary terms, as a local member, I see little evidence of proactive approach and chasing, and I address that to both the Broads Authority and North Norfolk. So what are the real issues here? Well, the real issues here are that there's a building that's been in a dilapidated form for over a quarter of a century. Goes back to the mid-90s when it first fell into disuse. It's in a very high profile position. It sits by the riverside. It's also on a route when people arrive in the village from the car parks or from the railway station, they walk right past it. And the impact on tourist trade in the pair of villages of Houghton and Wroxham is quite considerable. Now, I'm not saying that efforts have not been made. And I know the parish councils, both parish councils are very concerned that this is something that just doesn't seem to be shifting at all. And I know that there are more complications in terms of changes of ownership in recent years and all of that. But at the end of the day, the members of the public don't actually see any of that. They see a dilapidated building that every year gets worse and needs to be attended to. So I'm not expecting an answer right now, but I do need to make sure that that is raised in its prominence and profile, and that we put more effort into whether it's working closer with the Broads Authority. If you need my assistance in that, please do let me know. But I have been proactive in trying to stir the Broads Authority in particular in taking action on this, because I think whilst the development potential, the regeneration responsibility rests with them, the enforcement powers rest with us.
Yeah, you're quite right. But it is the Broads Authority that has, I'd say, the significant responsibility for it. And we had left it for their chief executive to come to a view on really how we push this forward. And there was talks about how we could maybe compulsory purchase, all sorts of equations. I will follow that up with you directly, and probably invite your assistance with that, because I think it would prove useful. But our role, just so other members are clear, is quite limited in this. As you say, it's only around the enforcement of the building itself, which we did carry out. So these are now the wider issues that we have very little sway over. But yeah, with your assistance, I'd be more than happy to push that one forward.
Okay, thank you. So I think when we next see this report, I hope we will be able to put our finger on a number of points of progress, shall we say. That would be very helpful. Are we all done on this? Okay, right. Can I have the recommendation is that the committee notes the continued progress of the enforcement board and the combined enforcement team. A proposer and a seconder, please. Councillor Reynolds and Councillor Fisher. Show of hands, please. That looks unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. So that's item 12 completed. Item 13 is the planning service improvement plan update. Mr. Fulcher, I guess, or is it Mr. Williams?
This is going to be a double act. I'm going to endeavour to present this relatively briefly and then leave all the tricky questions to Mr. Fulcher to answer. I'll just run you through the headlines of the report and make a couple of comments as I do. And I have an awareness that not every councillor here has been involved in this since its origins 2-ish years ago. So there's a number of newcomers to this subject as well as me, but broadly this has been considered by Overview and Scrutiny Committee on a number of occasions, roughly every 6 months since it started, and there is a Planning Service Improvement Plan, commonly known as PSIP. What a delightful acronym, within the planning service. But this report was stimulated by the last discussion, where this committee were particularly keen to understand the role and the performance of external consultees in responding to planning applications. And I'll come back to that in a second. But there's a chunk of the paper, section 3 mainly, that kind of explains what the plan is. And by my team's estimates, we've now completed roughly 50% of the action plan that was agreed in February, and Mr. Fulcher has tasked me with ensuring that the rest of it is completed by the end of the municipal year, which probably not coincidentally happens to tie in with the commitment within the corporate plan as well. Throughout this, we've endeavoured to take some customer feedback, and that's not always easy, as you will see from section 5. We've written to loads and loads of applicants and agents once their application has been determined, and bluntly had very little by way of numerical reply. That might be possibly because it's been determined they've got their proverbial bit of paper and they want to move on. But section 6 provides effectively the core of this report, which is the data, the consultee responses, and we've split it into a number of areas within that table. Firstly, taking external consultees as a group, but equally taking them separately to the responses from the town and parish councils, and then indicating both the proportion that we ever got a response from, if I phrase it like that, and the proportion where the response came back in the 21 days required. And by required, that flows from the relevant bits of planning legislation, which in simple parlance say when we consult somebody, we can't make a decision until that 21-day period has expired, unless they've commented or they've actively told us they do not wish to comment. So if I was to simplify your planning application process, it comes in on day 0. If we were astonishingly efficient and send everything out on day 0 and put the site notice out on day 0, that's never going to happen. But if you just take that as a concept, broadly, we can't determine it until after day 21, and then we should be determining it by the target date on all the applications, the majority of which will be 8 weeks or 56 days. But you can see from the data what the returns are, and the same legal position applies for town and parish councils. And indeed, at yesterday's engagement forum, 3 of my team, Mr. Lyon, Mr. Peacock, and Ms. Cawthorne, ran through some of these issues, and Mr. Lyon explained at some detail in response to some questioning as to where the 21 days comes from, which doesn't particularly helpfully, I'm not meaning this critically, fit with natural cycles of parish and town council work, but it is what it is in legal terms. That doesn't mean we ignore any comments that come in after that 21-day period. We will still take account of them broadly up until the point of determination. We decided not to highlight individual consultee percentages within here. So you do have the average, inevitably, as it's an average. Some are higher than that and others are lower than that in terms of their consultee response. And we are starting to engage with them, particularly with a focus on those that are longer. Whilst we produced this report, we thought we'd update on a couple of other bits that I know have caused some interest over time. So there's some information on extensions of time. So broadly, we have a target date, 8 weeks, say, but if we were to agree an extension of that 8 week with the applicant to say 10 weeks, that becomes our new target. And then if we determine it in 10 weeks, we get a sort of tick in the box. If it goes over 10 weeks, we don't. Both Mr. Fulcher and I are keen that we reduce over time our use of extensions of time. Equally, within the nutrient neutrality situation, it's been sort of impossible to ignore them for that. But we are keen that those numbers come down. And then there are some very lovely, colourful drawings of East Anglia. As somebody who's worked in a slightly more southern part of East Anglia than this, I was sort of intrigued on some of the comparables there. But at headline terms, they cover both performance on determining planning applications and success, if that's the right word, at appeal, and generally show North Norfolk in a very positive light in comparison with others. And then my final point, which actually links into some of the discussions on a number of the previous items, and it is in the Planning Service Improvement Plan as something that still is to be done. I'm quite keen that we, as is Mr. Fulcher, I know, and Councillor Brown, develop a slightly broader suite of performance indicators for your planning service than we currently have. So things such as the extension of time data, things such as the average time to determination are important, not just the headline stuff, which is reported, including to Development Committee tomorrow on headline performance for majors and minors and the appeals bits and pieces. The recommendations, Chair, are at section 17, I think it is, and I'm particularly interested as to whether the committee perceives this as, I'm being slightly tongue-in-cheek here, the last time it wishes to debate this, or whether you'd like, in my view, it wouldn't be illogical to like this, a further kind of concluding piece. And if you do, to me, I would like to come back here probably in Q2 of the next municipal year with the suite of data that is more fully representative of the planning service, that is the 2023-24 outturn effectively. And because if not, Mr. Fulcher, Councillor Brown and various of you will tell me off in some guise, some way of indicating with confidence that the Planning Service Improvement Plan actions have been completed.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Before I open up, did you want to say anything, Mr.? No, fine. The first thing I'd like to say, I think, is that I appreciate the length of the report. It's succinct. It seems to be targeted on the issues that we identified a goodly long time ago now, I know. These things do take a time to pull together. If I understood you correct, well, you certainly made mention of what I would call a key constraint as far as town and parish councils are concerned, and that is the frequency and timing of their meetings. That will always, I think, be a difficulty, but it's heartening that you take that flexible approach, that if they choose to make a comment and if it's out of time, then you will still take that into account in factoring the decision. Do you want to respond on that?
Yeah, so the basic answer is yes, but I suppose a plea from me, bearing in mind many of you have some kind of involvement in town and parish councils at various issues. So if there is a particularly important, from your perspective or the town and parish council's perspective, application that you know you want to consider at a key meeting that's outside the 21 days, I think it would be really helpful if you could let the case officer know that it's due to be considered on date X, and that the comments will follow through shortly thereafter. That will help us with the system, and 19 times out of 20 will be perfectly fine. Clearly, the 20th time might be if you were to suggest a date 12 months in advance. I'm being facetious there slightly, but if it was the next meeting, it's almost certainly going to be fine. But the more we know, the easier it is to factor into the process rather than just sort of waiting.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point, because I think across the spectrum, just we sampled all our approaches to this, they may well differ somewhat. I wonder if there might be something that might be done to, if you like, sharpen the member protocol on that. So can I leave that one with you? I think that would be helpful if we had a common understanding where those situations arise, then we would take the appropriate notification to the case officer. But some of us do that already, others may not. And I think some consistency there would be beneficial.
Final very short point on that. And from my limited experience, having been here a matter of months, and I'm not meaning this positively or negatively, some town and parish councils and their clerks are better at doing it than others as well. So I don't think it all necessarily sits with the councillor, but I suspect you can be the prompt in some cases.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And the other point that I just want, I think you have clarified that, and that is the, as you say, the very nice pictorial Eastern region illustrations there. They are those performance figures taking into account the extensions that have been mutually agreed between parties. And I do take your point about that. And I think that there is a balance, a compromise to be struck between the quality of the work, the quality of the decision, and the expectations of the applicant, and meeting their imperatives, if you like, if there are any. I think that probably we would recognize that that balance is a difficult one, and it may differ from time to time. But amongst that, I just would ask whether businesses who have got proposals which will deliver particular economic growth, or that are linked to other wider issues in terms of needing to get that done in a seasonal opportunity, whether you give them priority or not.
I'm tempted to say, so I'm therefore going to say it, aren't I? Do we prioritise those above the affordable housing cases, etc., etc.? So there are lots of different calls on priority. From my perspective, I am keen that we get to a position where, if we are seeking an extension above and beyond the normal time, it is because, and I'm oversimplifying this, because we are actively seeking further information, a better scheme, whatever it might be, from the applicant, or because the applicant needs to respond to a comment that has come in from some appropriate player, and not because, quote unquote, we, District Council, hasn't got round to it for whatever reason. And in my experience, bluntly, applicants are quite happy to work to a reasonable time frame to achieve their approval, if they've got that knowledge that the ball is in their court to improve something or to respond to something. It's the lack of communication occasionally, and the thought that it might somehow not be in their gift to improve, to get it over the line, that is the problem. And yes, business is important, and we should be dealing with them within the target frame, but bluntly, we should be dealing with everything within the target frame. Somebody's extension to their house is a huge moment in their life. In that, guys, it might be fairly small scale to many, but it's a vast thing for the individual concerned.
It's down to those fairly hard decisions that we have to make from time to time about the merits of priorities. Understood that, yes. So I think Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just you mentioned earlier that some parishes, town councils are better at planning issues than others. I did ask quite early after May whether we could have some training for Wales in particular, who had a really large influx of new town councillors. I was told that there were a number of others in that area, other parishes, who needed training as well. I haven't heard any more as to when that training might take place, and we're now getting on And it's getting a bit late, really, and I'd like to hear a bit more about that possibility.
Yeah, I'm going to answer half the question, then take a huge risk and get Mr. Fulcher to provide you with a date within reason, which he'll then expect me to deliver on, which is slightly risky, but that's what he was whispering in my ear. So firstly, I mean, I did attend quietly in the background the engagement forum yesterday, and it was very well received with quite a few town, parish and indeed district councillors attending the call, and Mr. Lyne in particular ran through some of those processes. Ms. Cawthorne ran through some section 106 related issues, and then Mr. Peacock talked about enforcement. So I suspect there will be an enthusiasm that the planning service continues to engage within that. And we trialled, I was on holiday, so Mr. Fulcher supported Mr. Lyon in doing it, the first of a more locally based engagement training session in Stalham 10 days ago, probably-ish, in that guise, where it wasn't just Stalham, but it was the parishes around it. And I believe about 30 people are in the room, and we're keen to roll that out, probably not on an individual council basis, but on a sort of geographically defined group of councillors. And Mr. Fulcher will tell you where he perceives the Wells area as fitting in with that priority. And then I will write down every word he says and deliver on it.
Well, essentially, Wells is next. So we already had that agreement whilst we're at Stalham, and I think we voiced it to various people that Wells will be next. So Jeff, Mr. Lyon, is preparing that presentation as we speak to deliver. So Mr. Williams can rest easy. He hasn't got all the pressure, but I'd like to think that that would probably be either the end of October or early November, because we do want to give people time. We'd like to do them quickly, but obviously the more notice we can give, the better the attendance will be. It's not a case of us needing to do much to be ready for it. We will be ready. And we're then going to roll it out to further. So yeah, it's part of the planning service improvement plan. We'd already been, I think, to 3 other town and parish councils before Stalham, although on a slightly different basis, but we've now sort of finalised what we'd like to deliver. Yeah, but I can promise you Wells is next.
Yes, I can speak well of that particular event. I attended it and I thought it was a very efficient use of time, and I thought that most people that I spoke to were very positive about the feedback. So well done on that. And if you've got a programme, that I think will be very helpful. The other good thing is, of course, is that one was in the east and the next one is in the west. Balance. Good. Right. I've got Councillor Howden, Councillor Toy and Councillor Cushing.
2 quick ones, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Behind most planning applications, you've got the statutory consultees. Are they responding in good time on the whole?
I would say it's variable.
Right.
The headline data is set out in the table within section 6. So we get, and I'm rounding the figures here, we get about a response on 70% at some point.
Right.
Of the things we send
Fine.
to them, but of that, only 46% of the total reply within the 21 days.
Right.
And a bit like the observation about town and parish councils, in my experience, some of our statutory partners are better at flagging the fact they might want a bit more time, and others, bluntly, you never hear from until something drops through the door X weeks later. But one of the team leaders is within the planning service improvement plan doing some work to try and improve as much as we can our communication to them, although bluntly it's a statutory process that they all know. And certainly I have a sneaking suspicion at some point 1 or 2 of us, me, Mr. Fulcher, etc., might be trying to call 1 or 2 of the organisations, I'm not going to name names, who it might be more in the concern territory and have a more strategic observation. But I have a sneaking suspicion North Norfolk will not be getting any better or worse service than any other district or city or borough council in the wider area. But the data is there at headline level.
Fine, thank you. Final part, Mr. Chairman, is I sit on the Norfolk Rivers Internal Drainage Board, and there is continued criticism of all of the planning authorities in the drainage board's area that there's insufficient cross flow of planning applications coming into the district councils and not getting back to the drainage boards. Now, you must understand that, I shouldn't perhaps say that, but if it's a big application, it has a significant impact on the drainage board, surface water flows, river flows quality and everything else. And so I would like to see from this council, if possible, a greater involvement with the internal drainage boards. Now, I sit on the North Norfolk, so I'm quite happy to facilitate that in some shape or form. But I think it is crucial that the drainage boards understand if there's 50, 20, 100 houses coming in as an application, because it has significant impact on their main drainage and their drainage works and keeping the drains clear so that we don't have flooding problems.
So yes, I more than welcome that kind of active engagement from you with your other hat on to set something up. The other bit I would just comment with internal drainage boards, having seen some of their comments, and I'm not meaning this critically, is a lot of the time they're also saying to us, please can we let the applicants know that they need the internal drainage boards separate. Consent. And I suspect there might be within some applicants and developers a lack of strategic knowledge as to when the IDB consent is required in addition to the likes of the district council, that there might be a sort of broader education and communication piece in there, but very happy to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think there's greater cross-flow needed right through that. So that, and you know, of course, because it involves the Environment Agency, we've got another unknown coming in there, but certainly that would be the way forward. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Toy.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak. I just wanted to talk about the prioritisation a bit from the other side. Officer Williams.
Talk about, did you say?
Yeah, the prioritisation. No, it's what I want to do was just make a point for about the prioritisation to hopefully benefit the committee, in that we must remember it's a fee-paying service. And therefore, in terms of prioritisation, whilst I accept strategically we would like to do that, it is a fee-paying service at which every customer, whether it's an extension to their house or they're building 150 homes, actually has the same priority. So I'm playing a bit of a devil's advocate there just to fill that gap in for the committee. Thank you.
I think that's understood, and that's part of the conundrum that we face. And you know, when we talk about priorities, yes, you can draw up a long list of number one top priorities. Yeah, life's never that simple. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just actually want to follow up, if I may, on the performance the planning training programme that you mentioned, and I think the burghers of Wales are going to benefit from. Is that I intending to have a plan for the whole district? Because I certainly know from conversations I had with the Fakenham Town Council, it's something I think they would benefit from. And I think you probably could group, obviously, a lot of the other villages around the satellite Fakenham as well.
So according to my peripheral vision, i.e. him, the answer is yes. So I think what I will take away from this is by the end of next month, so that's October, I will work through something with Mr. Fulcher and others that tries to set out the plan that covers, let's just call it everywhere within the district. We do need to bear in mind this is relatively resource intensive. So picking up on supportive comments from a number of councillors, you know, groupings are the answer, and probably not being too precious that, for sake of argument, somebody who missed the Stalham one, you know, if they turn up in the next one at Wells, that they're barred from entering the building would seem a little bit OTT in that guise. So yes, I think we should be seeking to do them in different locations every couple of months and get around the whole area and be communicating it a long time in advance. So you could encourage somebody to go to one in a different area if it was more timely based on their needs. But by the end of October, we will try and sort a sort of sensible diary out for that.
Okay, thank you.
We're still with the commitment that Wells is next.
Right, okay, thank you. If we're all done on this, the recommendations are that we note the content of the report, and the second one is the all-important one, I think, that you would like some guidance on. I'm going to put my hat in the ring here and propose something which I think would perhaps meet our needs and perhaps your expectations as well. The report, as you say, is halfway through, or will be halfway through the plan. This is, if you like, a midterm report on where it's gone so far and where we still have yet to go. So it seems to me, and the other aspect is that whilst you've seen certain improvements, you'd like to see those, I think, demonstrated in the longer term, and so would we. So it's about sustainability of those things that have moved in a positive direction. So I personally would see some merit in a further, what I would potentially closing report in maybe a year's time. We'll make that decision there and then. But the expectation would be that you would have been probably at the point of closure of your plan, and you would have seen those improvements, whether they are sustained or not, and then we would make a decision on whether we need any further consideration in the future. So is that something that rings with some degree of merit with you, Councillor Penfold?
Yes, thank you. Yes, it does. I just wonder whether a year's time is could we have some input on whether could it be sooner? I detected maybe yes.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the logic is sometime between next July and next September. So we've got to the end of the financial year, the end of the municipal year, and by July to September, we should have all the data up to the end of March in a sensible system. So whatever fits within that time, I think then the call is, does that then after that get effectively subsumed into the development committee's annual work programme, because they should see that data, and therefore you might take the view at that point you don't necessarily need to see it separate, or you could take the view that you'd love to see it every whatever period, but July to September would be fine, which fits in with what both of you have said.
Okay, all right. Any other comments in regard to that proposal? Okay, so I'm prepared to propose it. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. I've got Councillor Penfold. Can I have a show of hands then, please, to accept that recommendation, those two recommendations? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. I'm mindful that we've been going on just for 2 hours, and we would normally consider a break at the 90-minute point. And the remaining items are sort of what I would call in-house items. It's our annual report and our work programme and so forth. I'm going to propose a very short 5-minute break, if only because I need it, never mind about others. So, all right. If we reconvene at 11:45, and I would expect we'll finish thereabouts sort of soon after 12 o'clock there. Are we ready or thereabouts to reconvene, please? Yes, I'm aiming to get finished by then. Right. Okay, Matt, are we back online? Yep. Good. Righto, thank you. So moving then to the next item on our agenda is the annual report for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Over to you, Matt.
Yep, I'll try and be very concise about this. So this just covers the work of the previous year. So I appreciate several of you will not have been here for that. So it's just a summary of the work that was undertaken by the committee throughout that year. Any positive points, and also highlights some key concerns. So primarily, I assume you've all read the report. I'll just go to the key concerns to express some issues there. The first one is, and appreciate again that several of you were not responsible for these apologies. There were 29 apologies given over, I think, around 10 meetings. So, yeah, approximately 3 absences per meeting requiring substitutes. And I think substitutes were only arranged on, I think it's about 9 occasions. So, if anyone is going to give apologies, I'd just please ask that everyone's really making sure that you contact substitutes as early as possible to try and get a substitute to cover your position on the committee. Obviously, as was raised earlier under item 8, access to information has been was a key concern for the committee. Taken about 10 months to get some information requested, and I think hopefully that needs to be addressed going forward. Hopefully, as was discussed earlier, there's going to be efforts to make sure that doesn't happen again in the future. Again, something else that was discussed earlier, delays to financial reports. In the previous year, so in the year in question for this report, I think 3 major financial reports were delayed by an entire quarter. So again, we need to maintain pressure there to make sure that we're seeing financial reports on time, as it obviously all feeds into the process. And as was discussed really with those external audit delay, we need to make sure that we're not putting pressure on the finance team at the wrong times, essentially. So avoiding any kind of bunching up of reports. Finally, you will note, or several of you will remember, that the PCC gave apologies at extremely short notice when they're expected to attend a meeting. So going forward, I'm going to request that we have a stand-in or a substitute for the PCC, so we don't have that issue again in the future, because it's really detrimental to the crime disorder update. And then just going forward, I think in terms of conclusions, I think we had counted 73 recommendations made by the committee to Cabinet and Council. That doesn't include actions requested of officers. Only 3 of those recommendations were not accepted, and they related to urgent recommendations, which couldn't be fulfilled in the requested timeframe. So I think that's shows positive step that the recommendations being made by the committee are being listened to, adhered, and accepted. So that's everything from me, unless there's any questions. Obviously, this report will be forwarded to full council to bring all members up to speed with the work in the committee last year.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I've got one small proposal, or a proposal for a small amendment, but it's a significant amendment. And it's, I think, come to light probably since you drafted the first report, and it relates to the second recommendation, or yes, the second recommendation, which concludes by well, I'll read it in full. Requested information has not been provided in a timely manner or satisfactory manner, and needs to be addressed by officers. And I think that there is a bit that's missing there, and that is the bit that should say "and cabinet members," because when we look at the constitution and the role and responsibilities of this committee, it is actually focused on cabinet members in the first instance, and then offices. So I think we just need to be cognizant of that. Our expectation is that cabinet members take the lead on our questions and offices fill in behind those questions when that is necessary. So if you are supportive of that, then I'm going to propose that as an amendment. Is that a support or a question? Thank you.
It's a question, but I've a few more comments, so I don't know whether it's appropriate now or.
Well, if you just want to respond to this one in the first instance, that will clarify.
The response to this one actually illustrates a sort of some other concerns I've got with the report. So just in this one in particular, I think that recommendation is far too broad. Actually, I don't think it's fair, because I think it gives the impression that we request information and it doesn't come to us in a timely or satisfactory manner. I think you could argue that there are certain instances when that happens, but that's certainly not the case generally. And very often we do request information and it does come to us in a timely or satisfactory manner. So whether we put some before requested might be appropriate there, I think, because otherwise it's just far too broad.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think that when you read it on reflection, you're probably right, and I think that that's got its merit. So thank you for that. Any others? No. So in relation to that, okay. Any other points in regarding the substance of the report? What have we missed out? What have we? Go on, Councillor Penfold.
Back to me again. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I just make a point about, as vice chair of the committee, it would have been helpful if I'd have seen the report before it went into agenda papers. I appreciate I couldn't get to the pre-agenda meeting.
I think that
we
probably because you didn't attend the pre-agenda, that's how that got missed. But normally you would be, and I would certainly, yes.
I normally would be, and I think it would be helpful to have an email copy of it as well. So
yes.
You know, because I think some of the things that I've picked up we could have thrashed out there. So if we could do that next time, that would be great. So it's really around page 140, I think. Sorry, forgive me, page 142, and it's just a few more sort of subtleties of wording, I think, because it's coming back to our North Walsham High Street Action Zone, where I think it's fair to say there has been some divergence of opinion amongst committee members as to whether information has been timely or satisfactory. And I perhaps am one committee member who felt earlier than others that the information had been provided to us, but I appreciate that others didn't feel like that. That's absolutely fine. So for me personally, I think that last sentence I don't want to associate myself with. In either case, the information requested and so on. That's not something I feel comfortable with personally, and I just wonder whether, again, as I suggested with the recommendation, it could be that some members felt that information requested had not been provided, which covers those who felt it hadn't been. It covers those who perhaps felt it had been, which is me, and it also covers those who weren't members of this committee at the time, who have become subsequently, because of course it's difficult for them to associate with that comment as well. I hope that makes sense.
I think I get the substance of what your proposal is about. I'm not sure. I'm just wondering whether your proposal with regard to the recommendation, whereby we inserted the word some, is probably more appropriate, and whether that would meet your needs. But I think just Councillor Housley.
Sorry, I have to say that I want that sentence to stay. I made the point yesterday that a question is a point in time. It's the root of the question, and the root is the crucial point. And if the information isn't available at that root, and that route has to extend 10 months, I don't think it's acceptable. So I want that point to stay, please.
I think what I was trying to say is I accept that point from Councillor Houston. It's just that I don't agree with it fully. So whether we inserted something along the lines of some members felt, which would cover what Councillor Houston has just said, but would also be, would also satisfy what I'm getting at as well.
Well, I wonder, I think the word some might well be agreeable, but I think I wouldn't necessarily, I think that if you inserted the word some in either case, so if we just read that last sentence, in either case, some information requested has not been provided to the committee in a timely, satisfactory manner. I think that that reflects what the recommendation, your first proposal, and I think also that probably, does that meet your? So I think that some there would be an appropriate qualification of that. I think to do more than that would suggest that there is, and well, there will be differences across committee members, and it's entirely right that there should be, but I wouldn't want the report to kind of necessarily reflect that disproportionately. So would you be comfortable if we put that sum in there?
Yes, I think I would. I mean, it's a small, for me, it was only the clarification we sought yesterday. I think it is difficult for new members to agree to that, but so it would read, in either case, some information requested has not been provided. Yeah.
That would accord then with what you've proposed with regard to the front cover. Yep.
I don't know. That's what I was proposing on the front cover was more specific. That was a very general point about it making it seem as if, when we request something, it doesn't always come to us in a timely or satisfactory manner. But mostly it does. Obviously, what that recommendation was alluding to was the has, but it doesn't say that. So that's we need to make that clearer that most does come, so we can use the word some there. I think I don't know what the problem would be by saying I don't think it's particularly difficult for us to say some members felt this. You've said we don't always agree. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it would reflect better that some members felt that the information hadn't come in a timely and satisfactory manner. That would certainly cover me, because I felt sooner than others that we had that information.
But the point was, none of the committee members mentioned it or commented on it at the time we were having the discussions. So that they would have needed to make the point at the time. If they didn't make that point at the time, I don't think that's relevant.
I did consistently, and you can check that in the minutes. And of all the people in the room, I was probably the one who's been here all the time at every meeting, and full council and GRAC, where all of this went through. So I think I maybe came to the conclusion that I was happy earlier than others. But I'm not saying that it's, casting any aspersion on those who felt they wanted more information. Absolutely, that's fine. That's of course what you must ask for. It's just that I just want that distinction to be noted, that it could be that you felt it took longer than necessary, or some members felt it took longer than necessary to reach that, the conclusion we got to yesterday. It's just to reflect that subtlety.
Another dimension to this is that, of course, 6 of those members are no longer here, and so this is rather historical in that regard. I'm not sure that I personally would go as far as you, but that's a matter for others. I think the addition of the sum is an appropriate balance there, and a reflection of where we are.
I would be happy to accord with that.
Mr. Hems.
Sorry, just for the sake of completeness, then at section 5.2, you would need to add some in there as well, so that you're having consistency.
Yes,
throughout the report,
yes.
If that's okay.
Which particular line?
So 5.2 talks about access to information has been a key issue with significant delays
Access
in
with some
receiving
information.
some requested information, perhaps.
Yep, right. Yep. That's very helpful. Thank you for that. We missed that.
We missed that. That's fine. Absolutely. I think I'm gonna stand my ground on this one though. I would like that to read in that section about the has. In either case, some committee members felt the information requested.
Okay. So are you putting that forward as a proposal?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
And do you have a seconder? Councillor Fisher. Can I have a show? Sorry.
Can I just make a comment? Mr. Chair, I mean, I've attended, my attendance record certainly matches yours, Councillor Penfold, being GRAC and everything else. But I think in my 4-year term here, I think only ever missed one overview and scrutiny meeting out of every council committee or council meeting I went to attend. And we're now taking a vote on where most of the members of this committee were not actually present on this committee, voting about something actually you don't really know about. Now, Councillor Housen's and my memory, I think, are much the same, is it certainly have been many occasions, not many, but there's certainly been some occasions where we have asked for information and we have got it. And that's just a factual truth. I mean, that's not a subjective matter. So I think you're being, I have to say, I mean, obviously we get on very well at Councillor Penfold, but I do think you're being overly perhaps protective of your corner on this particular one. I think the compromise that you propose, Mr. Chairman, is a fair and equitable one.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bull.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Having only been on this since May, this has obviously been a bone of contention. I've seen it batted backwards and forwards many a time, and you know, I've no point to score because I wasn't here for those meetings. But it does seem to me as though, as you rightly say, as Councillor Penfold rightly said, that you know, councillors are entitled to their difference of opinion on whether or not they feel they've had enough information. Likewise, I respect that the other councillors feel on occasion they didn't feel they had enough because maybe they have their own views and the other side has their own views. I don't think it's unreasonable what Councillor Penfold's suggesting there. It equates to all sides. Everyone gets a fair whack that, you know, yes, in their opinion, they didn't get the information in a timely manner. And Councillor Penfold saying in his opinion he did. I can't say I wasn't there. It seems a reasonable compromise to me.
Mr. Chairman, can we come back then? So what is that final paragraph of the third book or that bullet point on page?
My proposal would be, in either case, some committee members felt that the information requested had not been provided to the committee in a timely or satisfactory manner. So it would be, in either case, some committee members felt that the information requested had not been.
Sorry, which page are you on?
We're on paragraph 4.2, the last bullet point, page 142.
Right.
And we're looking at the last sentence in paragraph 142, which I'm proposing would read, in either case, some committee members felt that the information requested had not been provided to the committee and so on and so forth.
Yes. Officer Jenny.
Thank you, Chairman. I just thought it might be helpful to clarify the basis of the annual report, and it's actually prepared by the scrutiny officer on behalf of the committee to give that objective review of the year. So although obviously it sits with the committee to commend the report to full council, I just sort of advise that members bear that in mind. And it is for that reason, because there is a change in committee membership and members will not always be consistently here to report on a year where perhaps they weren't sitting on the committee, particularly in a year where we've had an election and those members have left. So Matt prepares that on your behalf as the scrutiny officer, and that's the case across all councils, and it's an objective summary of the year that's presented to members then for approval. So I think, you know, maybe some of the tweaking of wording and so on may perhaps have an effect on the way that the report has been prepared, but that's just my advice as your Democratic Services Manager. So.
Can you just cover then the constitutional position in what we're discussing?
I think, as I said, I mean, it sits with full council essentially. You know, this is a report, and GRAC did one yesterday. It's an annual summary of the work of the committee prepared by the clerk, looking back over the year and collating all of that information. As I say, the committee can vote to amend it if they feel it's substantially incorrect, the way the information's been prepared. But I do think, as I said, you need to be aware that I'm just doing a quick sort of tot-up of how many members are currently on this committee who were present during that year where the summary was prepared. So just to be mindful of that, but it absolutely sits with members to make that resolution. And I just wanted to flag that up.
Thank you.
I think that's partly in a way what I was trying to say, that if we do put that some committee members felt, then that covers us for those committee members who have joined since then, because otherwise we're presenting to full council a report on behalf of ONS now, during which some of the new members haven't had a chance to contribute to this. So it would just to this particular item. So it would just make that clearer that there would, you know, that it's not. It supports that idea of some members felt this. I think that just gives it clarity, and it covers both those who felt, you know, perfectly reasonably that they hadn't had the information, and those of us who felt perhaps we'd had it earlier and were happier with it earlier than others. That's just seems to be a fair way of reflecting what we've gone through.
Chairman, I'm conscious that Saul's proposal has been proposed and seconded, so you should probably vote on that before voting on the substantive report recommendation.
Sorry, I disagree with that, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. Some committee members was not. What I said was a consensus I would have to agree to was some information requested has not been provided. Not some committee members.
Well, we'll have to vote on that first because I had a different proposal.
Sorry.
I think there are two slightly different proposals there. I think Councillor Housden had one which I felt wasn't clear enough, and we've got my proposal which was seconded, puts in some committee members.
We have a proposer, we have a seconder for that change. We have some constitutional advice with regard to the significance of that. So I think unless anybody's got an overriding objection, we need to take a vote on that. So those who would support that proposal, show of hands, please. Sorry?
My proposal, is it?
Yes. Your proposal, yeah, which is to change the on page 142, the last bullet point. Yes? Right, okay. So that's 7, is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and those against? Okay, it's carried. So that will be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So can we just vote on the substantive report, the recommendation to council now?
Yep, I think if we turn now to if we've all done on points that need to be raised, then let's go back to the substantive recommendation. And so we've got the change that I mentioned earlier with regard to the inclusion of cabinet members and to add it to offices there. And we've also got the sum added in the second bullet point. With those changes, do I have a proposer for the acceptance of the report? Councillor Penfold and Councillor Fisher. Thank you. Can I have a show of hands then to accept the report? Thank you. That's carried. Right. Okay. That took a bit longer than the 12 o'clock, but never mind. Okay. Item 16 is delegated decisions. So those were taken between March and August of this year. They are listed. Any questions? No. Okay. We are then, I think we are required to note those. Is that correct? Yes, to note, to receive and note those. You can tend to do that. Thank you. Right, then turning to the work programs, that's so as a record of, yes, The item 17 is the cabinet work programme, followed by the committee work programme.
Yeah, I would just note, obviously there was some delays with the managing performance report due to sickness absence. So cabinet will be seeing that after overview and scrutiny in October. I will make a reference to performance reports in the overview and scrutiny work programme as well. I think there have been a number of reports that have potentially dropped off the October cabinet work programme. So just refer to the Democratic Services Manager if she wants to provide any update on those at all.
I think the programme that you've got in front of you is the updated version. So I've just got the 4 reports going through to the next meeting of cabinet. So some of the anticipated reports are now going through to November, mainly the property transaction related reports. So as far as I'm aware, that is the current programme.
Okay. You happy to note that report? Anything else you want to say about?
Nothing else on the cabinet work programme.
No. Okay. Turning to item 18 then.
Yeah, so just in reference to the overview and scrutiny work programme, a few things to note. As noted, the performance management report was delayed by sickness. I do note that the officer responsible for the benchmarking and contextual performance reports is on long-term absence at the moment. So we will not get those reports. We would have had them today, obviously in line with the performance management report as requested. We're hoping to get those back on track with the December performance management report. So we won't see those until December. Just other things to note. You'll see there that we've got pre-scrutiny of the delivery plan on the October work programme. My understanding is the workshops that are taking place to support that, the kind of development of that action plan, delivery plan, those workshops don't end until some days after the October agenda will have been published. And as a result, it means that we won't have a written report on the agenda for the date of publication. We are hoping to get a draft to you prior to the meeting for discussion. I think that will be a very active and involved discussion to look through those action points and comment on those before they're agreed by cabinet. Further, just looking at the other items on there, access to NHS dentistry services, that is being reviewed by NHOSC in September. So I think we need to look at what their outcomes are. I know that myself and Councillor Holliday have also requested information from the ICB on access to dentist services. So we've certainly got a map of where those services are. We have requested waiting lists. I don't think they hold that information, but we are certainly looking to get that information, bring it to the October meeting. And also just to note, they're looking to bring forward a review of the scrutiny panel terms of reference and seek appointments, so that should when the corporate plan comes into effect and delivery plan comes into effect, when projects start coming out of that, this committee will be ready with a panel that can take on additional work and increase the capacity of the committee to undertake work such as the public convenience review that was covered in last year and covered in that annual report. So that's everything from me, unless there's any questions.
Okay, any questions? One that I'm just mindful of, and that is a need, I think, to discuss the future work programme. So that's those things that we would like to see included in the fullness of time over the coming year. I'm just wondering whether we might be able to do that via a workshop or a session via remote means, rather than take up full committee time. Would that be something that would appeal? It's something that we do need to discuss. It's something that we don't need to make, hard and fast decisions in regard to those items there and then, but we can have the discussions and we can have provisional recommendations that we can then just raise at the next meeting, so that all of that is then covered by a decision in public. Okay. So if we can just look at times when we might be able to do that.
Yeah, no problem.
It's not absolutely urgent, but I would like to see it in the next month or two, that we fit something in to cover that. Right, okay, any other questions in relation to this? No, are you happy to note this report? Thank you very much indeed. There are no other items on our agenda today, so thank you very much indeed, one and all, for your attendance and your input today.